Domestic terrorism is a growing threat in the United States. We all know that by now, and so does the federal government. Here's FBI Director Christopher Wray last year at 2 separate hearings.
What I can tell you is that within the domestic terrorism bucket category as a whole, racially motivated violent extremism is, I think, the biggest bucket within that larger group. And within the racially motivated violent extremist bucket, people ascribing to some kind of white supremacist type ideology is certainly the biggest chunk of that. I would also add to that racially motivated violent extremists over recent years have been responsible for the most lethal activity in the U.S. Racially motivated violent extremism, specifically of the sort that advocates for the superiority of the white race, is a persistent, evolving threat. It's the biggest chunk of our racially motivated violent extremism cases for sure. And racially motivated violent extremism is the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism portfolio, if you will, overall.
In other words, racially motivated extremism, white supremacists in particular, are a massive threat to the United States. The data speaks for itself. Of the killings committed by right-wing extremists in the United States between 2012 and 2021, the Anti-Defamation League says 73% were committed by white supremacists. Now, that won't come as a surprise to those of you who have been paying attention to the news the past few years. The racially motivated attack at the grocery store in Buffalo is just one of far too many similar incidents. El Paso, Texas, at a Walmart. Charleston, South Carolina, at an AME church. Poway, California, at a synagogue. Pittsburgh, at another synagogue. Charlottesville, Virginia, as white supremacists just marched through a college campus chanting, quote, "You will not replace us." And the sad reality is there will likely be more headlines added to this list. So what can we do to address this systemic problem? Well, we are seeing some action at the federal level. The House just voted on legislation to fight back against domestic terrorism in the wake of the attack in Buffalo over the weekend. It would, quote, create domestic terrorism offices in the DOJ, the FBI, and in Homeland Security. The bill also calls for, quote, leaders of the FBI, DOJ, and DHS to submit a joint report twice a year with a particular focus on the threat posed by white supremacists and neo-Nazis, including the infiltration of federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies and the uniformed services by members of those groups. Joining me now is Frank Figliuzzi. He's a former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI. He is also an MSNBC national security analyst. He's the author of The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. Frank, we know this legislation to combat domestic terrorism that just passed in the House. It has an uncertain future in our Senate. It doesn't make sense, frankly, to you and I, I'm sure, why it would. But if this were to pass, do you actually think it's going to have the right teeth to do something?
Katie, there's no teeth, unfortunately, in this regulation that's being passed by the House. There's no new law here. There's no new authority here. This literally says, as you've told everyone, count up the wreckage and tell us about it and tell us how bad it is a couple times a year. We can do that right now. It's really bad. You just recited the deaths that are attributed only to just one bad theory, white replacement theory. But to say that we're creating an office inside the FBI and the DOJ for domestic terrorism, they already have those units and offices. This is window dressing that gives no investigative tools or techniques to law enforcement to get out in front of this threat.
Frank, so then I'm going to put you in charge of this at DOJ. What are the mechanisms that you would ask to have to actually make a difference? Because we cannot survive as a country with yet another mass shooting event.
Yeah, we've now reached the place where the FBI is telling us that their caseload is for domestic terrorism has surpassed or equaled or surpassed that of international terrorism. And the threat is clearly greater right now domestically. So what do we need? We need techniques and measures and laws that look a whole lot like the international terrorism side of the house. What does that mean? Well, We have laws that make it illegal to materially support international terrorism. We have laws that say if you're affiliated with groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, et cetera, you're going to get the immediate investigative attention of the FBI. What does that mean? Undercover technique, court-ordered wiretaps, informant development. That almost can't happen right now domestically. Why? Because we don't have that kind of approach to it. We almost have to wait for the bomb to go off, so to speak, before we come in and investigate and realize the scope of the problem. So proactivity, investigative measures, talk to any FBI agent who's actually worked domestic terrorism. They'll tell you they don't have what they need to get the job done. And then secondly, we're going to have to take the social media platforms to task here, hold them accountable, and rethink how we do safety and security at social media platforms. Algorithms have to be enhanced to tell us way ahead of time that it looks like violence is being planned. There has to be a seamless integration with law enforcement and the social media platforms. We've learned just in reporting in the last 24 hours, Katie, through the Washington Post, that a platform called Discord allowed the Buffalo shooter to invite people into a private room. This is anonymity, right? And they could watch his live stream of the event. They could access all of his writings and ramblings. This is done in almost complete anonymity. This has to change, right? And the argument that I'm hearing from the far right that, oh, be careful, you're infringing on free speech. What they want, Katie, is free speech without any responsibility. Free speech does not mean freedom from responsibility. It's time to hold the social media platforms responsible and get them better at preventing this from happening. It's radicalization happening at the speed of a keystroke.
So, Frank, you were in active service for a very long time. This social media stuff, that's a new frontier, I think, from an investigative standpoint. You mentioned the Discord app or the platform with the 15 users that were invited that came in. Tell us the technical side of the investigation for this, though, Frank. How would one go about, if you were in the FBI, maybe tracking down who these users are? And what is the value when you actually find these people in terms of their participation?
Well, you're right, because what's happened here is technology, once again, has gotten out ahead of safety, security, and the ability to police ourselves. And so we need to use technology to counter the threat of technology. What do I mean by that? I mean, we've got to equip law enforcement with the ability to understand who's who in these private chat rooms. You know, this is essentially becoming the back alleys of our society right now, right? In the old days, you'd literally have the back alley where some crime would be planned and sketched out. That's happening now in these private, invitation-only, anonymous chat rooms, blogs, forums. And so what's going on in there? Let's give the government some window into this. If you're uncomfortable with the government having the window, let's cause the social media platforms themselves to understand who's coming into their house, who's planning what the language sounds like. This can be done with anonymity. In other words, you know, there can be algorithms written that say the following words and phrases are being used. We're going to tip law enforcement off right now, and we're going to ask them to seek court orders to identify the people who are engaged in that planning and discussion. This is no longer about free speech. What we're talking about with the Buffalo shooter in the Discord chat room was he was live streaming his murderous acts and giving people the plans to kill. That's not free speech. That is a crossing of the line to a federal violation. Why won't we give law enforcement or require the social media platforms to police those kinds of places? Maybe even eliminate the anonymous concept of back alleys on social media.
Yeah, quickly, Frank, before I have to let you go, you wrote a very compelling new op-ed for MSNBC, and you write about how Elon Musk is pushing for free speech on Twitter, but it's coming at a time when it's even more dangerous with the radicalism that we're talking about. If you actually had the ability to send a message, what message would you send to somebody like Elon Musk with this idea that free speech on Twitter is completely acceptable, including letting people write whatever the hell they want to write?
Well, I'd say to Elon Musk, look, if you're serious about taking over Twitter, ask the FBI director if you can spend 2 days in the terrorism sections at FBI headquarters. Let them show you the radicalization process happening at the speed of light. Let them show you the speech rhetoric, beheading videos, the kinds of things that are getting people to do things like Buffalo, and then come back and tell me if you think there should be some responsibility that goes with free speech.
Frank Figliuzzi, we always appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.